specialty was teaching middle-aged women yoga. She was absolutely beautiful, and she was described as captivating men and women alike, with her gray-blue eyes, and one ex-member of the cult described her as an enchantress who could look straight into your soul. The women in her classes became her first devotees, and they were easy targets. Most of them were looking for a new start in their lives, or some kind of new meaning. And at this time, Eastern religions and yoga, and like all women exercise groups, were very new to the Western world and to Australia. An ex-member said these women were going through a midlife crisis. Their children were grown up, their husbands were having affairs, and it was in the days when divorce was not as normal as it is today. Divorce was a huge deal, and Anne knew if she could get the women to leave their husbands, then their families would disown them, and that they would have nothing other than her to look to. So around this time, Anne also met Dr. Rayner Johnson. He was a physicist who was Master of Queen's College at Melbourne University. He was close to retirement at the age of 61 and had turned his attention from metaphysics to physics. Oops, I got that wrong. He turned his attention from physics to metaphysics. He was now more interested in what religion had to show us in kind of the cross-section of science and religion. He also started experimenting with LSD, not only on himself, but on other people, on patients. And he was completely captivated with and after doing LSD as a part of his initiation into the family, he wrote in his journal that her face became divinely beautiful with sublime authority. And he also wrote that she was unquestionably the wisest, the serenest, and the most gracious and generous soul I have ever met. He also declared or agreed with her that she was Jesus reborn as a woman. She was the new Messiah. And told him that the world would end in 1983 and that her divine status and mission must not be revealed, because the forces of evil were always looking for ways to frustrate the work. The plan for her was to work unseen, unheard, and unknown, and that kind of became the mantra of the family. To not call attentions to themselves, to stay hidden, because of course, if anyone found out what she was doing, she would surely be arrested. So eventually, Johnson, the physicist, and his wife bought a house in the town where Anne lived. And that's where things kind of started to get serious. So now they had like a home base and a place for the family to gather. And they did like weekly meditations, and she would give sermons, and that's when things kind of started to spiral out of control. And because Johnson was so well respected in the scientific community, he was able to recruit a lot of wealthy people to be a part of the cult. He recruited doctors, psychiatrists, lawyers, nurses, and social workers, among others. They also started to recruit was just very dangerous for very various reasons, for very many reasons. So they obviously targeted patients there, and they subjected them to heavy doses of LSD, as well as electroshock therapy. So Sarah Hamilton Byrne was one of the children of Anne, and she wrote a book called Unseen, Unheard, and Unknown about her time in the cult. And this is what she says about initiation and the targeting of patients from New Haven. She says, when the sect owned New Haven, the former private psychiatric hospital in Kew, things were very easy. They were booked into New Haven, and once in there, were completely at Anne's mercy. Her psychiatrist would put them under LSD for days, and even up to a week. They would be left alone in dark rooms while under the influence of the drug, and every now and then there would be visitations by Anne herself. During these go-throughs or clearings, which is what these initiations were called in the group, in the parlance of the sect, you were supposed to look at yourself and see how horrible you were, then repent and realize that only through Anne could you ever expect redemption. Through this drug-induced haze, Anne appeared godlike and even said she was Jesus Christ, and you realized she offered you a way to attain the true potential of your spirituality. Under the drug, while you're at your most vulnerable, you're expected to confess to incidents you were ashamed of in the past, or to secret fears or hang-ups. You were supposed to be able to relive and abreact past experiences so that these things could be put behind you and resolved. Sometimes Anne targeted special qualities which she called blocks to enlightenment, which you were supposed to look at and work on whilst under the influence of the drug. While at first the drug may have been used openly in the hospital by sect psychiatrists, after LSD became illegal, it was still used and still is, well, this was written a long time ago, by Anne as a form of seeking and maintaining mind control. The hallucinatory effects of the drug were well at the time came in contact with Anne were going through a bad period in their life. Their child may have just died, or their marriage had broken up, or maybe it wasn't anything as serious as that. Some of them were just questioning things, having a midlife crisis. A good friend or somebody they trusted recommended they go to a prayer meeting on the grounds that the spiritual side of life is so comforting, and that they themselves had derived so much from these meetings. Trusting them, they went along, and after the meeting, which seemed not very bizarre, they were introduced to Anne. She mysteriously seemed to know everything about them, showered them with attention and charm, and everyone around her made them feel special and welcome. It was not long before they received an invitation to be given the opportunity of a religious experience. They were not told that LSD will play a part in this experience. So Anne started to build her following, now by bringing children into the picture. Adoption was not as regulated as it is now, and she had a large network of followers, like I said, people who worked in hospitals as nurses, as midwives, social workers, that had access to babies, and then she had lawyers who could help forge documents to get her these babies and their adoption papers and passports and identification and things like that. As the children were growing up, she would tell them that she was their birth mother, and then she would also fake pregnancies so that the kids wouldn't know that the children were being adopted. So like she wore a big dress and she stuffed it with pillows or whatever to look pregnant when they got a new recruit or a new baby. She told the children that they would be the only survivors of the end of the world, and they would become the new master race. She told them that she was Jesus, and that she came from royalty, and that she owned castles in Europe, all of which was a lie, of course. She also had a group of children who helped her take care of, a group of women who helped them take care of the children, and they were known as the aunties. They would make sure that the children's haircut were all the same. They all had the same haircut. They all had the same hair color, which was like a white blonde color. They dyed it with peroxide bleach, and they made sure they were looking their best in the same exact outfits. It was really creepy the way these kids looked. She kept the children in a secluded area in a wooden lodge that was about 2 hours away from the family's main base. At the peak, there were 28 children. They were all homeschooled, of course, by the aunties mostly, because Anne, despite the fact that she wanted all these kids, didn't really want to be a mother to them. She didn't have the temperament for it. She was mean and impatient also given high doses of Valium to keep them docile, and they got these from the psychiatrists and doctors that were a part of the family. Also, between the ages of 13 and 14, they were put through an initiation or rite of passage where they were given large amounts of LSD, which did huge damage to their psyche and mental health. So, eventually, 2 of the children escaped and tipped off police to where they investigated the family. But they never really got their justice because Anne was found in the United States, extradited to Australia, but was only tried on falsifying documents, and all she had to pay was a $5,000 fine, and then she was set free. I believe she died a couple years ago, but she was never put in jail for what she did. Most of the children, when they got out, were housed together, but then eventually they were separated because it was such a large group of kids. But they were finally allowed to be kids without punishment or restrictions, and they could eat what they wanted. So, like, a lot of the kids who looked like they were 7 years old, who were actually 10 years old, started to grow and actually look their age. It was obviously a very happy time for them, but a very difficult adjustment for them. Not only were they set out into the real world, but they were also the center of a ton of media attention. So let's finish with an excerpt from the book again, because my roommates are home and they're being loud, so I'm sorry about that. But Sarah says, "We live apart now, although we see each other often. We get together for birthdays, holidays, and special events, and drop around to see each other's houses for visits pretty often. Every year on August 14th, the day of that fateful police raid on Up Top, which was what the compound was called, we celebrate our Freedom Day. We try to keep in touch with and support each other as best we can. We care about each other and worry about each other like a normal family. We will always love each other despite everything. We consider ourselves brothers and sisters because we shared a childhood together. Our experience has meant that only we can really understand each other. Only we can really understand each other. Only we will know the full story, the things that cannot be told or explained in an account such as this. There are many inadequacies of communication, many old resentments and guilts, as there are in every family, but only we will ever know and understand each other, the gulf of need and pain that was the legacy of our upbringing, and maybe only we can help each other in the healing of that hurt. Although the justice system let us down, I have nothing but praise for the police who were involved in our case. They were caring and diligent and worked long and hard at an incredibly complex case. Several of them gave us much needed support and assistance on a personal level as well. The strain of working on such a bizarre and draining case took its toll at times on all the police that were involved. It took a lot of time for some of us to accept that there was never going to be any form of retribution for all the years of abuse. So Sarah was actually the only one who kept the same last name as Anne. Almost all of the other children changed their names as they became adults. Some of them committed suicide because of the abuse that they had endured as children. And when you don't get the love and attachment that you need as even an infant, it can really wreak havoc on your life as you become an adult. So that's what happened to a lot of these people who didn't get appreciate